most of you met me yesterday, but I spoke with Pastor Robin about 6 months ago now, asking him if he would like to host Jules' writing. And he said yes. So here I am, also 6 months later, with a published book. I wasn't planning to publish my book until I met Jules, and he encouraged me to publish my book because he felt like it could speak to many people. Most of you heard my testimony yesterday, so I'll recap briefly. I lost 3 children to stillbirth, mainly 1 to stillbirth, 1 late miscarriage, and 1 early miscarriage. And today actually is my middle child's 5th birthday, so it's been a bit of a emotional roller coaster day today for me. The Lord speaks to us in many different ways. He guides us through the wilderness, and He gives us hope when we don't see through the wilderness. And one of my what I realized over the last few months last year is that grief and happiness can merge together, but so can light and darkness. Light and darkness, grief and happiness. And in my case, is when I would go to work every day or go to my family every day, I would put on this mask of happiness and pretend that everything was fine when reality was not. I was really grieving for the son that I lost, and it was just tearing me apart. And in private, I would come home and I would collapse in my room in a fetal position, crying and crying and crying. So even though I grieved in a healthy way for 2.5 years, I still have a lot of unresolved issues. I struggle with anxiety that only the Lord can help me to overcome. Anxiety or panic attacks where sometimes the panic becomes so real that I just want to jump. But the Lord speaks to us through His Word, and one of His words says in 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your anxiety onto Him, or cast all your cares onto Him, and He will keep you safe. And that's what He's been doing the last 6 months in my life. Last year in my life, where I would have panic attacks and the Lord would just speak to my heart and bring healing to those areas that I haven't received healing in. But God, for me, is a real person. I feel like I've met Him, because when a year before my son died, I had a dream where I was sitting on top of a mountain, and the Lord, I was in this dream, I was crying and crying and crying, and I felt the Lord's arms around me, and He said, "You are forgiven." And so for me, that was a very powerful moment in my life. And God told me many times gave me visions, not just once, not just 2 times, but more than 3 times, that I would one day be ministering to women that are broken, people that are broken, people that have gone through grief, people that have gone through abuse, people that have just gone through the wars. When I was living in the shelter in 2014, there was this woman who was living in the same house as me. She was a drug addict, and she was also abused by her partner. And one night, because when you're pregnant, you don't always sleep well, and one night I heard her getting a chair and getting a rope, and she was gonna commit suicide that way. And I just sat with her and I prayed with her, and I prayed with her until I also called someone to come and help, and she didn't commit suicide that day. She went into hospital for help, but it really impacted me. The stay in the shelter really impacted me, and it was one of the decisions of my life that I would never go back, because it's just culture shock. It's not something I would want to experience again, because it's like your entire emotions or insides are being ripped apart. And it is like a wilderness period where you're stripped clear and bare, and the only thing you can rely on is God. God can only get you through. And in that way, I liken the shelter that I lived in as it was my dark period, but it was also a period of light. A period where God spoke to me, God gave me hope, God gave me peace, even knowing that I would enter motherhood as a single woman, divorced, and going back to live with my parents with no job. How do you envision looking after a child that you cannot? And my prayer for my son was, "Dear Lord, please, I want to give him the best father possible." And that was my prayer constantly. And I was also thinking, maybe I should give him up for adoption, but I couldn't ever give him up for adoption. But then I just kept praying the prayer, "Lord, please give my son the best father." And then on hindsight, about a year later, after he died, I could say, yes, he has the best father, because he is with our Heavenly Father in heaven. And he doesn't have to go through the trials of life and through tragedy in life. He's free. He's more free than any of us. And for me, that brings hope, and that brings me great joy, because he didn't have to suffer like I had to. He didn't have to experience the pain of losing someone so close, or the pain of not knowing what your son looks like, or how he feels in your arms. That is my pain every day. I wonder what he looks like. I wonder how he would laugh, how my daughters would laugh. But I will never know, not until I meet them in heaven. And God taught me that his love is sufficient for me, for my broken heart. And God gave me hope in the midst of my trials and my tragedy, and he healed my heart. He pulled me out of the pit of despair so that I could bring hope to other people, so that I could share my story, and so that I could continue writing books to help other people. And I have a poem I wrote. It likens the grief and the happiness journey, light and darkness. Why I wrote it, I was walking to the bus stop one day, and there was a split in the sky. So on one side it was raining, and on the other side there was sunshine, and I was just standing right under the split. And I felt like God was speaking to me, and within 5 minutes I wrote a poem. And so the poem is called "I Stand Under the Crack." I stand under the crack of two different worlds, where one is pouring angry, sad raindrops, and the other where the sun is glaring brightly in the rising dawn. A split world, darkness and light, light and darkness. Happiness and grief merge. A woman camouflages her grief behind the shadow of trees, silently glides onto the happy road, but grief quietly confronts behind the screen. So it is where two worlds collide. I stand under the crack. I am that woman living under the split in the sky, where worlds crisscross the crossroads and become one. Happiness and grief, grief and happiness. Shadow and light become the familiar presence of relief. I wrote this poem about a year ago, around this time, and this poem is a clear resemblance of the world that we live in today. We live in dark times, but our hope is in Jesus Christ. That is where our hope lies. And even though I've gone through tragedy after tragedy in my life, my hope is in Jesus, and Jesus is my light. And I will rely on him for the rest of my life, and I will worship him for the rest of my life. And God can heal the brokenhearted if we just cling on to him, and if we just ask him to fill us with compassion and with his love and his healing. If we just surrender our struggles to the foot of the cross, he can come into our hearts and give us hope and peace. The time that I accepted that my son died was April last year, when I surrendered to God's will and accepted that my son was not going to come back, and that this was the reality I was going to be living, not knowing what he looked like and not knowing how he would laugh and how he would talk. And so by surrendering to God's will, I learned to have peace in my heart again, and I learned to have hope again and not to be afraid of hope. There's a hope so sure if we just trust him, and he will give us peace, and he will provide the footsteps for us. He will guide our footsteps every step of the way.